Oh, very much like, sorry, I got the recording notification. So it allows me to track everything. I can tag people, I can put in comments, I can do due dates, all kinds of things. So it's how I track my projects. And then here, Lucidchart, this is where we put our workflow down of what exactly do we want to put in our certification program, what courses do we want, what modules within the courses. And then here we're referencing the SMEs. These are going to be the content experts, the people who are saying, yes, I put my stamp of approval. This is what needs to be in this certification program, or this doesn't need to be in here. Once we have our plan, then we move on to our design. And for this, what we found really, really helpful is when we're working with these SMEs, I'm in technology, and we're talking to people who are doing coding, and they know this product inside and out and all the features. If you're not in there with them doing it every single day, it can become very overwhelming trying to listen to them and then turn it into e-learning. So what we do is we use Zoom. And, again, my smart sheet, I keep track of who am I reaching out to, when am I setting up meetings. And I record a meeting with the SME, and I ask them very strategic questions, very templatized. Hey, what is a high-level overview of this feature for the product? What is a scenario in which someone would need this? And we use that to then, we upload the video to Descript. It pops out a transcript for us, which makes it much easier to go through and extract what we need to put in the e-learning and what we might want to come back in and reference later, follow-up questions, etc. Once we have that, we move to what we call our design doc. And for that, we use a tool called Confluence, which is embedded in Atlassian. For us, the design doc is the end-all be-all. It has everything that's going to be in a course, and if it's not in the design doc, it does not make it into the course. And at this point, we also have SMEs going back through the design doc as well, tagging them in, questions, is this, are we saying this the right way, etc. Working in content that you're not that familiar with, you need to make sure that you're teaching it perfectly. And that's why we rely a lot on our SMEs. The next process we do is then we go to the development process. So it does translation. So for us, we're a global company. And, oh, I might have frozen. My internet is a little unstable. But we're a global company, so we need to be able to translate our e-learning. So Elucidata is great for that. But we also need to make graphic designs to embed in the e-learning. So for that, depending on our team, we all have our own strengths. I work with some people who are excellent in Illustrator. I am not so much. My strong point is in other aspects of my work, not Illustrator. So I use Canva, both of which, though, we have our brand standards in, and we make sure that we are following the colors, the guidelines, all of that, no matter what design tool we're in. And our e-learning leverages a lot of screenshots. And so for that, we use Snagit, and we annotate them, again, using very specific templates and guidelines for colors, how thick are the boxes we're putting around images, etc. All of that goes into Elucidata, and then we're ready for the QA. So the QA, this is where we do our quality analysis. Again, going back to the smart sheet, we track this, who has reviewed what module. And here, our SMEs, we actually have 3 separate areas of SMEs for our QA process. We send our design doc, which is the content alone, not in the design tool, just the content. We send that back to the SMEs for the content review. We send it to our tech writers, and they give it a review for grammar, Encino tone, style guidelines. And then for our individual team, we send Elucidata, and then my teammates go through and they make sure all the buttons work, the links work, the flow is good, the images populate. And so at the same time, we're running 3 different QAs and keeping track of all 3 different processes. Meanwhile, I'm kind of getting all of that feedback from all 3 areas and going back in and making any changes and updates and keeping track of it all in our project management tool for our smart sheet. At the same time, I am also doing a QA for our web assessor. So we do an exam at the end. That's how people get certified. So I have to do an audit. Are the questions represented in the content? Are the questions good questions? Do we need to have a SME write new questions? And so there's a lot going on in this QA process, and sometimes it can take a while in this stage, and that's okay. Once we've once we're done with the QA, we go to pilot. So that's the exciting part. We release it out into a very controlled group. And here, the tools we use, we upload it into Docebo, which is our learning management system. And we very carefully look at our Lucidchart, which is our wireframe, which has all of the courses and everything in it. And we cross-check. Is everything that we said that we had at the very beginning of our product or at our project, did everything make it into the LMS? So it's just a really good way to do a cross-reference. Again, we pull in a very specific group of SMEs, like internal people who know the product. We have them go through the pilot. So that way they are able to say, ooh, this still is not quite right. Let's work on this content, etc. We run a Slack channel where we can gather all of that feedback. And so we pilot it usually 2 times. If it's internal, an internal course, we might not pilot it. But for something as big as this, we're going to do several pilots on it. And then we go to the review process, which is just one final QA before we're ready to go live with it. And that is, we've done feedback, we've done changes, and we are ready to send it into the wild. And at that point for our launch, which was just this week, so I'm still very excited that we were able to get it out there. Check us out on LinkedIn if you have not. But now it's just living in Docebo, our LMS, and Web Assessor for the exam. And we are, at this point, not done. We maintain. Because as a software company, we do releases every 6 months of new features. We sunset features, we update things. So our course will never be done. It will always be in a phase. So right now, what we've launched today, in 6 more months, we will be back in, tweaking, adding in more content, reaching back out to SMEs. So it's a constant process. Now, I like this because I can be a perfectionist, and this helps me come to terms with the fact that it's never going to be perfect. And so if something on the launch isn't quite perfect for me, I know I'll get another chance to fix it or tweak it for the next launch that we do. But after this is out there now in the wild, the maintaining should never be as big or massive as this first process to get it through. And then again, it's a lot of tools. We rely on a lot of things. It's a lot of moving pieces, but that's why my day starts and finishes with my Smartsheet. I'm able to keep track of all the different aspects through the entire process, and it helps me feel that I know what is going on at any given point. And it also allows my supervisor transparency into the work that I am doing. And so for people who are going into instructional design or into project management, it might seem overwhelming by all the tools. When I started in Encino, I had never heard of our authoring tool, Elucidapp. I had used Rise. I had used Articulate, not Elucidapp. I had never heard of Docebo, our LMS. I had used Canvas. I had used other tools, not Docebo. I'd never heard of a Smartsheet. All of these tools I had never heard of before I started. And that's the benefit of joining a really strong instructional design team, because they want you to succeed. So I work with some incredible colleagues who onboarded me very well. And now as our team is growing, we have our own enablement of how we're teaching our new teammates what to do. And so we all have our own kind of lane that we enjoy the most. So for example, one of my colleagues, Madeline, she loves to teach people how to use our authoring tool. So we'll take a new hire, we'll put the new hire with her, and she'll do a demo, she'll walk them through. Then that new hire will come to me. I'll walk them through project management, how we use our Smartsheet, how we do our communication. And then they'll go over to Alex, our other teammate, who will walk them through Illustrator, Docebo. So we all have our strengths and we all have our own projects. but we all manage to work very well together. And that's why communication when you're project managing is so important, because you need to know not just what's on your plate, but what's on your colleagues' plates as well. And the last thing I'll say about, project management is embrace a template. That's probably been the easiest thing for me. And the most important thing is we have templates where we have questions that we always ask our SMEs. That way, if I'm in an interview and I know that I'm going to export it and pull a transcript, I ask the same questions in the same order, and it makes it easy for me to go back in and find what I need. We use a template in our design docs. So all of our courses are laid out in the same format, which makes it easy to go in and find information. I'm doing a lot of communication with SMEs. I have templates. Am I asking them for review? Am I reminding them that I need something from them? I have templates. I pull, I personalize, and it makes the communication aspect go a lot faster. And then also when we do our QAs, when we have people go through and do the quality assessment, we have templates for that. What are we asking them to do? It's a checkbox, and it just streamlines the process from beginning to end. So that is a very high level overview of how I go through and do my project management. I enjoy instructional design very much, and some people really do just want content given to them and they want to build it and be done. But when I told my hiring manager on my interview, I said, I love that, but I love to project manage myself, because you are then involved in every single portion of the project, and ownership comes naturally with that. You feel like you are a part of it, and it just is, for me, much more fulfilling that way. So with that, I will stop sharing and go back on mute.
Thank you so much, Susan. Our next presenter is Kristin Hall. Kristin?
Hi, everybody. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm not feeling great today, so I sound a little off. Let's see if I can share my screen. I don't have many slides, but I did just kind of give some high level things to think about here. So I'll just give you an orientation to where I am now. Like Sherry said, I do have quite a bit of experience in the industry and have worked with a number of different project management styles and methodologies. I am personally certified in the PMI, PMP certified. And so I'm used to more like traditional waterfall style project management tools and process. But my company, Proficient Learning, is a Scrum Agile project management adopted model here. So we have a number of Scrum certified Scrum Masters. We work in 2-week sprints and kind of take our projects through. We have been adapting our processes right now just a little bit. So I thought I would just walk through a couple of those points and maybe some tips that I have. So I think number one, it is important to adopt a model, right? You have to decide as a company and as a team, what are you going to follow and how, and then embrace that. I think some of the pain points that we felt with Scrum were more client related, where we needed to manage the budget better. And so when I hire project managers, I tell them that your job is, number one, to manage the client expectations and the client. You have to manage the timeline, you have to manage the budget, and you have to manage the quality. So everything is really falling on your shoulders as a project manager to really drive the project. You don't really need to know about the content, and you don't really need to know about ADDIE model even or instructional design, but I think it certainly is beneficial to have instructional designers as your project managers if you're managing instructional design projects, because it just gives you that extra knowledge, depth, and ability to deliver quality. So like I said, we have adopted Scrum. Now, what are some great points about Scrum? I think the main things that I love are the transparency of the projects, just being completely open and transparent, and being able to plan ahead with the sprints. And so we have a Kanban board, a sprint board, where we have what's in doing, what's not started and what's done. And I know I said those in the wrong order, but we use that board every day. So we have what we call our sprint call every morning. And so that's a sprint check-in call. We have a 30-minute call with the team every single day to go through our board, our sprint board, and review the projects and give the statuses. And so I think when you're defining your processes, and that's the next thing on my list, I think it's important to figure out how often you're going to check in. Is every day too much, or is it needed? But certainly transparency is key. It's important, just like Susan said, that everybody knows what's going on, with every project. And that is great, because then anybody can jump in. I think one of the things that makes Scrum Agile for us and work for us is we do have a resource pool where everybody is trained on pretty much everything. We have an onboarding process for our instructional designers where they have to actually deliver each type of deliverable we have. So an e-learning, a workshop, a learner workbook, a QRG, a quick reference guide, any kind of deliverable that we may face from our clients. We want our instructional designers to be able to onboard to each of those type of deliverables. And then therefore we have a resource pool where anybody could step in on any project at any time. And so those check-in meetings in the mornings are key so that we can talk about that. What are the risks? What are the challenges? Is there a bottleneck? Is somebody too busy? Is somebody have time to jump in? And so that makes us very flexible. I think too, in defining the processes is your workflow. Now I'll just show you a quick snapshot. I did not want to, sorry. So this is our workflow. It's such a lot that I didn't want to go through this and talk about it, but it is important to define what that is and how the work and the deliverables flow through the process and where they're going. So I think in that, working as a team to define how often, what are the sprints going to look like, where does that happen, and what are the smaller phases within each sprint, and then be again transparent with that so that everybody anchors to a common goal, a common vision, and a common way of working. And then the tools, Susan certainly touched on some great ones. We have adopted Monday.com. I do have a snapshot of that. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling so much, but so here's just a typical Monday.com board. I don't have this expanded, and you can put this in quick views. You can do the Kanban view, or you can do the expanded view. And so I have loved Monday. It certainly is good. Some other things that we do are project status reports. So like, what is the actual status of your project? Do you have anything in the red or the green or the yellow? Especially focusing on those reds. This is a great way to communicate with your client as well. And then, but just kind of picking out the right tools for what you need. And some of those, we use Slack for communication. So we are Slacking all day long with each other. Again, for transparency and communication, we have a channel for every single client project that we're working on, and we share the deliverables in those Slack channels so that everybody can see everything that we're doing all day long and weigh in on it. And again, just being flexible, agile, and transparent, communicative. I think there's, two directions that I sometimes like to look at in project management. There is one way of working and managing as you're looking at your internal team, managing your resources, managing the statuses of the project internally. I think you also have to look at who is your client, or who is your, sometimes that's an internal client if you're working in say organizational development and creating a training project internally. Sometimes that's externally if you have external clients. And so there are a lot of tools there that are critically important, just down to the simple things like an agenda. How are you communicating back the key action items? What automation can you build in there? I know that there are several new tools for teams, especially that they have built in that will automatically record and translate your meeting. There's meeting agenda tools and meeting note-taking tools built right in. So just think about how you can automate things as you go to make those things faster for you, again, aiding in that agile mentality. But things like that project status report, you make it one time, and that's kind of blending, right? That's more of a traditional waterfall PMP style of project management tool. But I find that blending some of those, I guess, theories and techniques around project management are sometimes helpful. The one thing that I've noticed, especially in instructional design, is very few project managers in instructional design have experience with managing budgets. To me, that is a more advanced skill to be able to manage a budget and manage to a budget, but a very necessary skill, because even at the core or the most simple projects, I mean, how many of you have gotten asked, how many hours is that going to take you to do that? You know, so if they say, hey, you know, create this e-learning module for me, and then usually the very next question is always, how many hours will it take you to do that? And then you as the instructional designer are having to come up with that. That to me is one of the key tools, right, that we all are, I mean, probably we've all done this, but researched and Googled to try to figure out, are there standards out there of how long it takes to finish something? But as a project manager, I think that is a key tool that you need. You need an itemized list of every deliverable that you have with the number of hours that it's going to take your team to complete it. And then you're measuring yourself against those hours to see if you can get that down and build in efficiencies. But that in itself is a key tool to be able for you to budget your project and then manage that budget. We actually have to deal with external clients and their budgets and write SOWs and things like that, scopes of work for each project, and then adhere to that. So your job as a project manager is making sure you have that scope of work in front of you at all times. That's another reason that we really love Monday. You can attach those documents directly to the project. And so you can find the scope of work, you can find your budget, you can find everything you need right in one place, so that you can, you know, easily just access it, check it while you're on the calls and while you're working with your clients. And so, you know, I think we certainly look for automation in every step of the way, but that is a big one, to just have some kind of reference documents that you can use as a team. Within the process, you know, like I said, we're kind of merging and adopting. I think we have noticed some pain points, you know, here and there. And so some of those we have already troubleshooted and fixed, which was not adhering to the scope, or letting the projects go over budget because the client wants something extra. And so then we just want to make the client happy, so the project may go over budget. And so I think building in, you know, a lot of those lessons learned to make sure that the documents are attached, to make sure that you're very aware of the budget and how much things cost or how many hours they take or however you're managing that is key. We've actually asked the project managers now to begin forecasting out ahead, you know, what their months are going to look like and the money's going to look like and the finances and everything, as well as the number of projects, the number of resources we need. And so managing all of that in Monday, we're actually utilizing Monday as our CRM or Salesforce type tool as well. So we have a pipeline of projects coming in that we can pre-resource out and then just, you know, blend right into that Scrum methodology. I mentioned before we rotate on a 2-week sprint. A couple of the things that we've done, again, to build trust, transparency, and collaboration in the team are to have the instructional designers report out. So we take turns. It's normally the project manager is always reporting out. We've switched that to where now the instructional designers report out on their statuses every other day to blend and balance the team. And then adjust. We're just, you know, working, we've got some new roles in our team that we needed to build in. So we just got a learning strategist, which is a more advanced instructional designer. and is really involved in the strategy overall of how we'll approach each project. And so we needed to blend that into the process and work that in, which we've done. But I think, one of the key things about Agile is not only being flexible for your customers or your internal customers, being flexible for your team and allowing that team to be able to flex. I think instructional designers get sometimes bored of just working on e-learning or just working on workshops. You need to always be able to challenge and rotate and pivot no matter what comes up. And then, just kind of allow the flexibility with the team and the tools and the processes. And so we have been following the forming, storming, norming kind of mentality. And so we are just in our kind of in that kind of ebb and flow where we feel a pain point, but we immediately corral the team, openly discuss it, figure out a solution, and figure it out. I did just put down a couple of just best practices. Again, training. Is it necessary for you to be certified as a project manager to work as a project manager? Absolutely not. I would say that probably only 2 or 3 of our project managers are certified, but many are great. And I think it's all about those core behaviors that you need to have, and I've put that in here, just being responsive. As a project manager, you need to be able to reply to that email within an hour, just being with it, paying attention. You're kind of a multitasker. You got to be on top of everything at one time. And so I think taking action and executing is key. Defining the expectations both for your internal team and your external customers, whoever they may be. And like I said, that may be a different expectation setting in your internal kickoff meeting and your external kickoff meeting, but it's so key to define that up front. And even things down to the level of client expectations that you're learning from your analysis, right? Like what kind of graphic style are we looking at here? How interactive, how advanced, really kind of coming up with what that is and making sure everybody on the team is on the same page. And then communication, of course, is key. And so I've identified a little bit of how we do that with our morning stand-ups. And we have a longer sprint call every 2 weeks where we define the workload for the team, looking at 2 weeks in advance, and then they're off to the races. One other pain point I'll point out we've had to adjust to is that some of our projects are due shorter than 2 weeks. So if we have a client that needs a project turned around in less than a 2-week period of time, then how are we managing that within the sprint when we're only having those planning sessions every 2 weeks? And so we've just built that into our morning stand-ups. We identify those due dates in monday.com and then just approach those in the team. But yeah, I think that pretty much, sums it up. We have a very talented team, and, I'm really proud of all they do. We certainly are still learning and growing as we go. But yeah, I think that will wrap it up for me.
Thank you so much, Kristin. We really appreciate it. And just so some of you know, if you have questions that are addressed to a certain person, we've sent those on. You can be checking the chat, and the presenters are answering those. And then we'll also have a larger discussion at the end. So now we'd like to introduce Matt Schmidt. Thank you so much, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry. And thank you to Susan and Kristin for your informative talks as well. Let me go ahead and share my screen and get this set up on my end with Zoom. Let's see here. There we go. All right. If you guys can see what I'm seeing, can you just give me a thumbs up in your video? All right. Thanks, Sherry. I see your thumbs up there. Cool. All right. Well, welcome. So we've had some perspectives that are coming from more of an industry perspective. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking a little bit more about what's happening in post-secondary university settings and in higher ed. and less so from an e-learning perspective, more from a research perspective and a product development perspective. So let me tell you a little bit about the Agile methods that we use in the Advanced Learning Technology Studio at the University of Florida. So we're an Agile shop, and the reason that we use Agile is because we are engaged in software development. So while e-learning is absolutely part of what we do, we are also developing software products. We're developing health interventions for a range of patients and users. So it's a little bit different than an e-learning context. And within this context, what we know is that it's incredibly unpredictable. In addition to that, we typically don't have long development processes. Long development processes are ideal for waterfall methods, but they don't necessarily work very well when you have to move quickly in an unpredictable context. The specific projects that we work on are often intended to address a gap in our knowledge. And so we don't really know very much about the context, the users, and the learning problems. And so we consider the design landscape there to be unmapped. And so what we have to do is essentially move forward in a way that allows us to map that design landscape while we occupy it. And with these parameters, it's really important for us to be able to adapt quickly. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see what is a traditional waterfall process model. And I want to point out that that bears a lot of resemblance to the typical instructional design ADDIE process. And there are reasons for that. I won't go into that right now. But being able to map your development processes with your design processes is a critical skill for any project manager. And I'm going to return to that point as we move forward. Now, in the studio, the way that we use Agile to achieve the goals that we have is to first start with the understanding that we are not engaged in research to prove. That is, we're not developing a product and in doing research on that product to determine whether or not it leads to improved learning outcomes necessarily, but instead over a range of iterations to consistently and continually improve our software to the point that it's refined, it's effective, it's engaging, and it's satisfying for our users. And to that end, we understand that design is not necessarily prescriptive or predictive, but instead we view design as a negotiative act that happens between a range of stakeholders, users, designers, and so on. So the other reason that we find Agile to be particularly useful is because Agile creates concrete artifacts. So after one iteration of Agile, we have something that we can present to stakeholders or to users and to gain really quality feedback on that, as opposed to, for example, presenting more general ideas or concepts and getting feedback on that. So what we find is that when we put a product in front of a user, we're able to get much more actionable feedback than if we're just kind of talking about ideas. So when I was asked to do the talk, I was asked to kind of speak to how Agile might be approached by new learning designers. And one of the things that many new learning designers are going to experience is that they have limited or no design or project management background, or what background that they do have is based on traditional project management coursework. So you're doing just PMP or PEM or what have you. And so how does a instructional designer approach this in a way that allows them to kind of get into this Agile area? And the first thing that I think makes a lot of sense is to root an Agile methodology in what someone already knows, right? To kind of base it in their prior knowledge. And typically that's going to be on the basis of a more predictive model, whether that be a predictive traditional instructional design approach like ADDIE, or whether it be, a waterfall method of software development or what have you. Using that as kind of a jumping off point is really an effective way to do it. And what you can do is, if your processes allow for it, you can juxtapose. You can show, here we're going to try an iteration that uses a more traditional approach, and then we're going to try an iteration that's going to use more of an agile approach. And let's talk a little bit about how they're different. Let's talk a little bit about what worked, what didn't, and so on. Now, I understand that that's not always going to be feasible within everyone's different contexts. I'm lucky enough to work in an academic context that does allow for that kind of exploration. The other thing that's really important is to adapt your methods based on what's working and what's not. And Kristin spoke to this a little bit when she said, kind of creating hybrid models where you're taking maybe Scrum methods and you're mixing that with, Kanban boards or what have you, or you're taking kind of an ADDIE approach, but then for certain aspects of it, you might incorporate agile methods. That's really important because, again, when you're going into a design landscape that's kind of unknown, being able to be flexible is really important. And then the last piece is to use the ABCs, and that's to always be communicating. Again, Kristin mentioned that you have to be able to jump in, respond to those emails, or use Slack or whatever kind of communication channel that you have. But you need to always be communicating with your team, because Agile moves quickly and things can change very quickly. As a result, you've got to be able to get everyone on board when things begin to change. So here's an example of how we are taking what is known and rooting our processes in what is known, and using this as a way to communicate a more agile process. So up at the top, we have a design thinking process. So many of you are probably familiar with this. Got very popular when the Stanford Design School kind of started to heat up around the process. And so what we've done is we've taken that process model and we have mapped it onto a sequential approximation model, which is an instructional design model that is rooted within agile development methods. And if you take a look at the sequential approximation model, it's the one there on the bottom, you're going to see that you have all of the phases of ADDIE incorporated there. It's just that they've been recasted in a way that is going to be more iterative and a little bit more flexible. So by taking the design thinking processes and very kind of intentionally and systematically mapping those onto SAM2, we're able to communicate to the team, okay, we're walking through a design thinking process, but putting it into a process model that fits instructional design thinking and instructional design historical knowledge. So that's just an example of it. And if you want to get really detailed, then we take that SAM process model and we break it down within the SAM phases, and we kind of show the different agile processes as they play out within those SAM processes. So across here, we've got the 3 phases of the sequential approximation model, and you can see how iteration then finally is going to lead in that 3rd phase to evaluation that becomes more and more robust as the product becomes more mature to the point that it's ready for release. The other thing that I'll say is to keep it simple. So I'm sure that some of my students are here in the webinar. So I'm going to apologize if you're here in this Slack chat. But the point here is you can see that this is actually our daily stand-up Slack channel. Instead of doing face-to-face stand-ups, we use Slack and we keep it as fast as possible. I encourage my students to take no longer than 2 minutes to do their stand-up, and that seems to be very effective. And what we found is this is an excellent way for us to keep our finger on the pulse of the various pieces of products or projects that we're working on at any given time. Now, in an academic context, things are further complicated because students have wildly different schedules. They are not working 40 hours a week in a studio, so we have to be able to be flexible and adapt to those differences. while at the same time having product and project needs. Obviously we've got deadlines and we need to be able to meet those so that when we're collecting data, for example, with our research, we need to have a product to conduct research on. All right. And so the final piece that I was asked to speak to was what are recommendations for someone who's coming into this, and how might an instructional designer be able to prepare for going on to the job market? So I'll speak to that now. And the first thing I'll say is you need to be very selective about the project management process that you choose. And that's because Agile, just because Agile is hot and just because Agile works very well in some contexts, that doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere. So it's not always the answer. Another thing is, if you decide to adopt an Agile approach, you really need to go all in. It requires dedication, and it requires that you continually reflect on your performance as a project manager and seek to improve, because I don't know anyone who comes into an Agile framework and is a pro immediately. And indeed, it changes for every project that you work on. So you need to be very reflective about your practice. And in addition to that, there's a paper that just came out, I think last week, by Johannes Strobel and a student at the University of Missouri, that kind of brings into question many of the assumptions of what makes Agile work. For example, many developers find daily stand-ups to be ineffective and inefficient, annoying, and a waste of time. More senior developers specifically, with more junior developers getting more from those meetings. So a good Agile project manager is going to be looking at that and thinking about how to deploy their team in a way that's lean and effective and highly, highly efficient. And let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because quite frankly, there is a reason that the waterfall method has continued to be so fixed in practice, and that's because it works. So I don't think that we should think about things in terms of Agile methods versus traditional methods, but instead pick the right tool for the job. I think that more longitudinal, better defined e-learning projects, for example, are much more amenable to a waterfall method than to an Agile method. And then finally, there are many, many different flavors of Agile. I think I already mentioned a few, like Kanban and Scrum and Lean and so on. And you need to think about which one is right for you. And for me, I always find that I chafe when I am being too adherent to any given model, and I always am building some kind of a hybrid, using tools from one area, processes from another. And then finally, for learning designers who are seeking to join the workforce, if you come into an interview and the interviewer drops the question, tell me what you know about Agile. My recommendation would not be to say, well, I've never run an Agile project, but instead to focus on what you actually can do, which would be more along the lines of, well, I've learned about Agile by going to this awesome webinar, or I've read about Agile, or I've looked into the tools for Agile, etc. And to that end, you can prepare yourself by getting familiar with the tools that are used out there. I saw a ton of tools presented today that you guys are probably going to be able to dig into. Some that I see a lot of in job postings, or Jira, Taiga if you're into open source stuff, and of course Trello seems to be ubiquitous anymore, right? And it's free, and instructional designers seem to really, really like free. And then the other thing I would say is learn to be able to communicate what you know in terms of your theoretical knowledge versus what you know how to do, what you've actually experienced, and the knowledge that you've developed on the job, right? So again, those are kind of the key things. But again, I will also say, and I think this was touched on by some of the previous speakers, project management is not instructional design. It plays a role in instructional design, but don't forget, that as an instructional designer, you bring a wealth of knowledge and skills to the table in addition to your project management skills. And being able to cast your project management skills within that broader context of the many other skills that you bring, that's really critical. And that's something that if I'm hiring someone, that's something that I'm absolutely looking for. So that concludes my slides. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and pass the mic back to Sherry.
Thank you so much, Matt. We really appreciate your insight. So we have approximately 9 to 10 minutes left. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Daisy, were there any questions that didn't get addressed?
Yes, there were, and I'm gonna go by order here. So some of the ones that came when Matt was talking, I think Kristin and Susan addressed, but I'm gonna go with Kristin. Villa asked, do you have a recommendation of a resource that we can use to help ID estimate the time for a certain project? That was the first one. And Raja asked, how do you decide to use the stories to develop within 2 weeks in sprints? What are the challenges? Do you use burnout charts and velocity for that, for manage hours? Do you follow other Scrum ceremonies?
Yeah, so I do follow other Scrum ceremonies. We do have sprint retrospectives and reviews at the end of each project. And as we go, we kind of handle that in that longer every 2-week meeting. We kind of go through each project and say, how is it going or how did it go? And then what do we need to change? I think that is where, as far as the user stories go, we write that into the Scrum board. We put kind of a description of the user story there so that, again, everything is in one place. And so we do that. As far as the burnout charts and velocity, I think that's something we are not necessarily tracking. I have just started tracking. I have a big spreadsheet that I just have been putting together this week with every project, how many hours everybody's worked on it. Did we stick to the scope? Did we go over budget? And I'm trying to then say why. And that's, again, allowing me to analyze and make data-driven decisions to figure out where we need to adjust. And so far, we do feel those pain points and we are adjusting, but there's no, one thing. I think the main thing was just going over scope as clients are demanding and need more for less. And as far as the charts go or the resource hours, we do have, there's a number, I want to say we found 5 different websites out there that all are quite old. I haven't seen anybody do one recently. I have and so Carl Kopp, I think from Bloomington, Pennsylvania, Bloomsburg, I'm sorry, developed one that was really good that I used. And then, but I looked at 5 different ones and came up with an assessment, all of which were well over the hours that we're actually performing in. So I will say that since our team was beating all of the standards by so much, we just developed our own based on actuals. And so we just measured that and figured it out. So I do think it's different for each person. While I'm talking, I was going to also just give one other tip that I thought of from that. If you are looking to get into project management, I would say that one of the best ways to do that is volunteer for like a nonprofit or something. Any volunteer work. I got hugely involved in that just so I could practice outside of my regular job. So if you get involved with any kind of volunteer, you get to practice being a project management without basically getting graded on it. And you learn so much and can apply that experience to your interview. And then I also wanted to make one statement that I don't want people to think that becoming a project manager makes you like get a promotion over an instructional designer. To me, each are completely equal and different. And you can be an instructional designer and a project manager at the same time and manage your own projects, and that is phenomenal. You can also have a separate job, but never think of it as that one is more important than the other. They are equally important.
Thank you, Kristin. I think there's one that is came from Elena, and then one that is from Elaine too, that I think is for both you and Susan. How do you use PMI framework? This is for Susan in particular. How do you use PMI framework in your ID project management process? What approach to scope planning do you find most effective? And Elaine, for you, Kristin, how has PM helped you? Is it really applicable?
So I will say it hasn't helped me that much. It has. It's great. I mean, please do it if you can. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity. I think I got PMP early in my career because I wanted career advancement. So I was motivated basically by money. I thought that if I got my PMP, I could make $90,000 a year. That's what I had read at the time, and this was in 2004. And so I think early on, I had written project management as part of my thesis upon graduating with instructional design, and was like hugely passionate about it. What I found is that no, it did not. I did not automatically get a pay raise or a job title. It was very helpful in just getting the big picture of the project and recognizing that I just play this one part, right? And so it's that my instructional design role was so important to me, but I needed to see the broader picture of where this was going from an organizational standpoint. And I think that made me a better instructional designer, to be able to see that bigger picture. And to understand how finances and scope and the business works. I think all of that was hugely eye-opening. And then I certainly have applied all of the skills that I learned in my day-to-day work, just how I'm organized, how I'm responsive as an instructional designer comes from some of that knowledge that I gained through the PMP. I have learned that a lot of organizations have their own internal project management courses. If you work for a large global company, they're going to have their own project management training that they want to take you through. So it's not always critical, but certainly something, you know, if you're questioning it, I would say start with a certification type course. You don't have to go the full PMP, but it's certainly some new letters I get to add to the end of my name, right, and build my resume, which is always fun. So I like those letters added at the end.
And I'll just hop in real quick and say I'm homegrown. I don't have any certification in that regard. I just took classes on it in my master's degree, learned about it, researched, asked questions for people who are project managers that I work with that are in other aspects of the company, and then just pulled in what I liked and what I think worked and went with that. So.
And maybe we have time for one more question. It was to you, Kristin, from Michelle Davis. Basically, a developer, one of the biggest complaints is that PMs who constantly want to put time and budget logistics into scope before requirements are obtained. So does your company take these types of changes into account in the development of contract with your clients? So you mentioned that your PMs are now being asked to tie plans to budget. Are they required to manage this as well?
They are. I will agree with your husband, but I will also say that is just the way of the world, right? We've got to always put out the price. You have to put a proposal out, and that proposal includes the price, and that proposal includes the higher level design of what we're going to do. Then you actually have the internal and the external kickoff meetings and get into it, and you realize it's so much bigger than what we scoped for. That is probably one of the number one things that happens at my organization. What we have done to fix that is we implemented that learning strategist role. And so that highest level of instructional designer as a learning strategist meets with the sales team prior to the proposals getting written. So in our workflow, we built in a sales strategy call before the proposal goes out. And that is with that learning strategist and instructional designer to give that input up front. But I agree, that is a very difficult one. You're not even able to perform an analysis of any kind until after the price is determined. And so, yeah, you just build in some strategy at the beginning has been our workaround.
And you know what? I'm going to do one more question, and I'll throw it out to anybody, but I think Matt, we teach project management to future learning designers because that's a job expectation from employers. We do it because we have to, and there's no one else who can manage the design project. What if organizations that employ learning designers take the project management duties away from the designer's scope? Would you describe that as an ideal state?
Well, I can't say no, but I can say heck no. I don't think that's the right approach at all, because an instructional designer who doesn't understand the intricacies of project management simply isn't going to be able to be efficient in what they do. Whether that's, doing more traditional waterfall approaches or more agile and iterative approaches, it doesn't matter. Whether you become a practicing project manager or not, you need to understand kind of what is going to be expected in the life cycle of a project.
And I think that's all we have time for. We want to respect everyone's time. So thank you to all. Thank you so much to our speakers, Susan, Kristin, and Matt. We really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.